I want to talk about the Libs. You said there's no choice in Victoria. There is more choice now than there was a few weeks ago federally. We've now got, obviously, the Libs and the Nats. The coalition has abandoned net zero. Terrific, well done, with a few caveats, but basically well done. The big question now, Rita, is immigration. And we've already seen splits emerging there. We had Kelly Sloan, we spoke to her recently, and she was on Sky recently, but she seems to be a big Australia person. So that's on one, so that's New South Wales Libs, obviously. Bridget McKenzie has come out speaking, Rita, against her coalition colleagues who are kind of hesitating to tackle immigration. Is that correct?
Well, yes, and we saw Andrew Hastie step down from the opposition front bench over this issue because he wants to have a real debate and a real differentiation with Labor. Obviously, at the last election, the Liberals' policy was to have a lower figure, but it wasn't dramatically lower. It wasn't a vote changer. So this is one of those issues where, again, you've got both major parties at odds with the Australian electorate. We've got poll after poll showing Australians want to see a reduction in immigration for a number of reasons, economic reasons, the pressure it adds to the housing crisis and hospitals, waiting lists, a whole bunch of it. But also there's cultural issues about assimilation. And again, that's never talked about by anybody because they're all too terrified. But the polling shows that the Australian electorate is not being represented by the major two parties when it comes to this issue. And if they want to win an election, the coalition, they've got a lot of ground to make up. They've finally differentiated from Labor on net zero. They need to be differentiated dramatically from Labor on immigration. We have brought in enormous amounts in the recent years, enormous amounts, changing the face of the country. And there hasn't been a debate, James, that's endorsed that. There hasn't been a groundswell of support from the electorate saying, yes, please, more of this.
Well, and yet, though, Rita, it's actually worse than that because we're now at the point where you bring in such a large cohort of migrants that it then becomes impossible to have the debate and talk about it because, of course, people will say, oh, you're being anti-us because we want to bring in more of our own communities into the country. And that is a big problem. It actually affects the nature of the debate. If you saw Susan Ley speaking before with our colleague Andrew Clennell, she looked terrified of the question when she was asked about this. And the reason why she's terrified is because her own party room is completely divided on this. In the last 48 hours, there's been all sorts of reporting that the moderates, the modern Australia people, they say they don't even want to use the term mass migration, which is exactly what Australia has been undergoing. 1 million newcomers in the term of the Albanese prime ministership so far. We don't know what this year's net overseas migration numbers are going to be, but we know from the, regular overseas arrivals and departures numbers, we think it's still going to be really, really big. Not only can they not nominate a number, they can't actually have, and this is the real key issue to this thing here. It's all fine for them to say, oh, we'll have English tests and, we'll have a values test or this sort of thing. Do you agree mateship is a good thing? Yes, no, maybe. I don't know what that's going to look like.
The Vegemite test.
The Vegemite test, But the thing is, we're not actually having a debate because they talk about it in terms of, well, we just want to make sure the infrastructure and the housing is there for the migrants. This assumes, and this is the coalition, this is the Liberals at least, assuming at the moment that Australia is just going to get infinitely bigger. And so long as you have enough roads and hospitals and sky kennels in your big high-rise developments here for everybody to go and live in, then, well, there's no problem. But what needs to be happening here is debate, a discussion. And, I like your idea. When did we put this to a vote? Maybe we should have a plebiscite or a referendum on this. How big do we want Australia to be? Because what they're assuming here is infinite growth, infinite more density, cities getting bigger and more crowded. And, the Australian way of life, which was sold to me 25 years ago when I first came to this country, it looks very, very different now. And it's not the same, and people did not get a choice on this, but they were had this foisted on them, and this is the debate that the Liberals need to take to the Australian people, but they are scared to. They're scared of their own shadow on this issue.
They are terrified of their own shadow. We saw the ridiculous, hysterical reaction to Senator Jacinta Price just mentioning the fact that we've had this mass numbers coming in from India, and perhaps Labor likes those migrants in particular because they overwhelmingly vote for Labor, according to Labor pollsters. She was quoting a Labor pollster and all hell broke loose because, God, how could you possibly state something that might be remotely accurate? We do have to have this debate. We also have to have a debate about is it in the interests of the existing people in this country to have this mass migration. Now, you may argue, well, we're bringing in taxpayers, we're bringing in people of working age who are going to be contributing in an ageing population, we're going to have more economic growth the more people we have. So you can make those arguments, but let's be honest about the debate, because there also is an issue of assimilation. If you've got people coming here, do they actually embrace Australian values? Do they want to contribute in a way that's positive to this country? Are they bringing in attitudes that perhaps don't align with our values? And you're going to have to be able to talk about that rather than just mouth vacuous motherhood statements about diversity is our strength, which is pretty much the standard of debate in this country at the moment.
Yeah, and it's also, what we were talking about before with the economy is absolutely true of immigration as well. Australia has the choice of going the European path, which is out of control in many European countries now. In America, and I think, James, you're going to be talking about this a bit later, Donald Trump has come out and said to Europe, you've got to watch your immigration is out of control, it's destroying Europe. And he's also said we need to rethink immigration in America in terms of the values of the people you bring in rather than just simply where they're coming from. And that's a sensible decision. It's classical Donald Trump. It's, of course, the even mouthing those words, you're immediately, oh, you're a racist, whatever they call you here. But the reality is, if your immigration program is not based on assimilation, as it was in the 60s and 70s up until Gough Whitlam came along and ruined it, basically. Unless your immigration policy is based on bringing the best people into the country, guess what? You're going to have problems, James.
Well, no, that's right. I mean, Rita mentioned the whole debate over, the skills shortage and all that. Well, I think it's something like 12% of our migrant population is actually skilled migrants. So, it's not, we're not getting it done from that point of view. And you look at this long skills list and you look at the number of people here on bridging visas who are just rolling the dice over and over and over again just to try and, get some longer term visa. The whole system has been completely abused, I think, really at this point here. But this whole point that the Trump administration has been making, and I will talk about that later, Stephen Miller, his kind of immigration guru, has spoken about the problem that when you bring large numbers of people, you actually bring that set of attitudes from different countries. And, you do have to have discussions about what do we need to do to remain, an egalitarian, democratic, high trust society. And these are things that people will shy away from, but they're discussions that need to be had.
And the Trump administration, just on that, has ordered the embassies here to start monitoring crime according to demographics to see if there are certain demographics overrepresented in the crime statistics. Something that you would think our own state and federal government would be doing and would be readily available. That sort of data used to be readily available. You could search it up very easily in official crime stats, but these days it is very difficult to get that. And that's for a reason, because there are certain demographics that are dramatically overrepresented. And again, the bureaucrats don't want that to be out there and talked about.
And that, again, is the European, particularly the British approach, where all the problems to do with immigration, rather than being ventilated, aired, discussed, and genuine problems sought for from the community, they suppress the knowledge, they suppress the information, they lie about it. That led directly to things like the grooming scandals, those sorts of things, where the bureaucrats are literally, and the governments are literally deceiving the population. As Rita said, Jacinta Price made the great sin of merely raising the issue that Labor, by their own admission over many decades, use immigration to bolster their own numbers. They've been saying it and boasting about it, going back to Whitlam. So I don't see why it's such a sin for a member of the coalition to speak up and say, really, are we happy about this?